Talk about a rug pull. Am I right? Ken Klippenstein tweets out, President Trump announces he'll be requesting a record $1 trillion Pentagon budget. Wow. Wow, wow, wow. This tweet went far and wide. This video clip went pretty viral. 2.8 million views as of the time I screenshotted it. So let's take a quick look here.
Great things happening with our military. We also essentially approved a budget, which is in the facility, you'll like to hear this, of $1 trillion, $1 trillion, and nobody's seen anything like it. We have to build our military, and we're very cost conscious, but the military is something that we have to build, and we have to be strong because you got a lot of bad forces out there now. So we're going to be approving a budget, and I'm proud to say, actually, the biggest one we've ever done for the military.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. So you can imagine some of the reactions to this. Arnaud Bertrand, face it, America, you got screwed yet again. More money for wars abroad by the guy selling himself as the anti-war president who was going to put America first. And he just gutted your social programs and enacted the biggest tax hike in U.S. history to pay for it, referring, of course, to the tariff war. Christy Yamaguchi-Main says, again, this is how you know the whole Doge thing is absolute bullshit. We're apparently on the brink of financial ruin at all times when it comes to Social Security or health care or college in this country, while simultaneously there's infinite money when it comes to war. Absolutely. Karthak Senthi says, whatever happened to Doge? That's right.
Remember they were getting around to the Pentagon.
Yes, they were getting around to it. Yes.
They just got there. Give them time.
Well, it's really funny that a lot of Twitter reactions to this, and I don't blame them, were saying, wait a minute, what about Doge? I thought Doge was going to trim the fat in the federal government. Doge at one point even signaled kind of vaguely that they were interested in looking into the Pentagon budget and perhaps making some substantial cuts. Well, I wish that Ken Klippenstein had used a little more video. Maybe that was all that was available on one of the networks. But this is from the full video of the Oval Office meeting, which lasted about 45 minutes, right after Trump promises a $1 trillion military budget. He unironically invokes Doge, citing a woman getting $2 billion for environmental, and it had nothing to do with environmental. So you talk about chutzpah, right? You have this agency called Doge, which is supposed to trim the fat. They say they're interested in going after the Pentagon. You come here and promise $1 trillion Pentagon budget, which is about a 20% increase over what we already have. And then you got the balls to actually say, you know, we have Doge, which is important, but not in this way. It's important for going after the women who get paid for environmental who don't do environmental. So here, we're going to pick it up in the last few seconds of what we already saw and say, watch, he seamlessly goes right into the Doge thing.
So we're going to be approving a budget, and I'm proud to say, actually, the biggest one we've ever done for the military. We're cutting other things that were under Doge, but under a lot of other, when you look at a woman getting $2 billion for environmental, and it had nothing to do with environmental, and they had $100 in the bank, and they give her $2 billion. Many of those cases, all that stuff is going to be cut out. But we are getting a very, very powerful military. We have things under order now, the likes of which we've never had before. We've never had the kind of aircraft, the kind of missiles, anything that we have ordered. And it's in many ways too bad that we have to do it, because hopefully we're not going to have to use it. But the military is very, very powerful, and it's going to remain that way.
Yeah, so, this is why more and more I'm saying that was a ketchup baggie on his ear.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there you have it. I mean, to reference Doge right after you announce $1 trillion Pentagon budget, like, I guess when you have lackeys like Benny Johnson and Jack Posobiec and Johnny MAGA Ultra, whatever the Twitter handle is, I guess when you got viral accounts that will just pump you up no matter what you say in any context, you can get away with saying that. like the last thing I would want to say after announcing $1 trillion Pentagon increase is Doge. I would
Yeah.
not want to bring that up. I would not want to remind people, hey, wasn't this supposed to be the administration that rooted out waste? And doesn't a large percentage of the MAGA base even want us to cut military spending? Steve Bannon said we have to cut military spending if we're really serious about a Doge type program bringing in any sort of meaningful realignment. But no. And I used to take him somewhat seriously when he says, hey, we're building it up because we hope we don't have to use it. Now you seem pretty keen to use it. I mean, you've already used it. Yemen, you've already used it. You're bombing Yemen. You continue to bomb Yemen. Pete Hegseth in this conference says it's been a very bad week for the Houthis and there's more to come. This administration has been more warmongering in its first 100 days than any I can think of, to be honest with you. And so this is just, I mean, you talk about a complete screw job. But this brings to mind, of course, some promises from both Doge and Hegseth himself. Pentagon proposes $50 billion in annual cuts and identifies priorities to expand. So there was the catch in there. That was February of this year. But then, just a couple of weeks ago, March 25th, Responsible Statecraft reports Doge wants to cut the Pentagon by 0.07%. His recently announced meager $580 million reduction is just an exercise in reshuffling. Pete Hegseth is the his in that context. Last week, Secretary of State Pete Hegseth directed the termination of over $580 million in Pentagon contracts, grants, and programs. They amount to less than 0.07% of the Pentagon budget. The elimination of this spending aligns with the administration's effort to reshuffle the budget to promote a wholesale reduction in not to promote a wholesale reduction, important, in military spending. Secretary Hegseth made this clear in February when he ordered his staff to draw up plans to excise about $50 billion in the Pentagon budget annually for at least 5 years, only to offset greater spending in 17 priority areas. These include further militarization of the border, needless expansion of the U.S. nuclear arsenal, and ill-conceived plans to develop a Golden Dome missile defense system for the United States. Accordingly, Hegseth announced, it's what's funny to me is that there aren't more like conspiracy theories about the Golden Dome. Like, you got a lot of people in this country who are paranoid about 5G. You would think an Iron Dome would make people a bit paranoid. Accordingly, Hegseth announced in a video last week that the eliminated spending did not align with the administration's priorities. In other words, they are not a good use of taxpayer dollars. The secretary proceeded to outline a terminated contracts, grants, and programs, lamenting one program for 780% cost growth. According to Hegseth, we're not doing that anymore. Hegseth is right to balk at a program egregiously over budget and behind schedule. Cost growth and delivery delays are long-standing and pervasive issues at the Department of Defense. However, to cut wasteful spending fast, the Secretary's stated intention, he must start with big-ticket items in the Pentagon budget. These are service contracts and major weapon programs, which are particularly susceptible to cost overruns and delays. Well, spoiler alert, that's not happening. Instead, Secretary Hegseth has focused his attention on firing civilian employees and nibbling at the edges of the Pentagon budget to shore up more funding for the president's misguided priorities. The result is a performative appeal to the American people who suffer the social and economic consequences of a runaway Pentagon budget, further militarization of U.S. foreign policy, and foregone investment on civilian infrastructure. Taxpayers don't need Secretary Hegseth to explain why he's eliminating less than 0.07% of the Pentagon spending to simply redirect it elsewhere. They need big, bold action that prioritizes their security needs and wallets over the financial interests of military contractors. They need deep cuts to the Pentagon budget, regardless of parochial interests. So, I got to say, if we don't do it, no one else will. This is yet another instance of us getting to say, we told you so. What did we say? We said exactly this. We said they would make some nominal cuts as a performative gesture, but then they would only continue to actually add pork to the military budget.
Right.
And even we didn't expect them to go $1 trillion right
Right.
away. But now
Right.
here they are. So they make first they say 50 billion in cuts. They cut that to what? What is that? 1% of the promised amount? No, I think a 0.1% of the promised amount. 580 million over 50 billion, whatever the math is. Don't kill me if I'm wrong on that. But a very, very tiny, tiny fraction of what they said they were going to cut. And now here we go. Just 2 weeks after that, here's Donald Trump saying we have just approved $1 trillion for next year's military budget because we need it, because there's a lot of bad people out there, and we hope we don't have to use it, even though we are using it right now in Yemen. We're having a talk on Saturday to find out if we're going to have to use it in Iran, but the boss over here by my shoulder seems to think it's necessary. Yeah, I mean, this is just an absolute mask off moment here. $1 trillion on the military. I hesitate to call it mask off because it wasn't a very good mask. It wasn't a very good mask. But
no, it was not.
Yeah.
Trump's real core base, I've said this many times, the libs have their base, and we've spent years dissecting that base. Trump base, I feel bad for in a lot of ways. It's a base largely of broken men who feel alienated, disconnected, like they don't belong to anything, or they don't have a role in society. And those are always people who are susceptible to cultish thinking. And with social media and the internet, you have a means of creating a false sense of belonging for people who feel that way, unlike anything you've ever had before. So you've largely got a movement that sits there online listening to multimillionaires like Benny Johnson tell them about how poverty builds character.
Right.
And they don't want to let that go, because once they do, man, they don't belong to anything anymore. They're not. We had somebody today on the video we did about Basent. The market was green for a minute. Commented, well, this didn't age well.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're back, baby. Because hey, man, and it's the same with the libs. It's the same reason you can't persuade them that Barack Obama was a criminal who got us here, right? Because once they go there, they don't belong anymore. They don't belong. That's what these political parties are, man. It's like a club for lonely people to feel like they belong to something, so they don't get overwhelmed with existential dread. But as time goes on and there's no real material benefit, quite the opposite, you start to really see the consequences of policies like firing the entire staff that provides heat to poor people, including seniors. Most of these people are not monsters. Some of them are, most of them are not. How are they
Right.
going to feel when that old lady that they personally know, maybe their own grandmother, can't afford heat? Right? Like they're really trying to sell them on the idea that this is a sacrifice we're going to make now, but we're going to be back from it. And what happens when we're not? What happens when we're not? And you're just dealing with all the consequences of all this. More and more people are waking up. We are seeing this. Unfortunately, the Democrats are not an alternative. They don't really offer an alternative. Look at what their idea of an alternative is. Hands off NATO and Cory Booker,
Right.
the guy who helped to squelch drug importations from Canada. That's your idea of an alternative. It's
Just voted
yeah,
against the arms embargo. Bernie brought that bill up to stop, selling weapons to Israel, and Booker voted against that. He's one of the most in the pocket of Israel there is. Yep.
yeah. No, this is why we still get very often, well, so what do you guys believe in? And we've said it again and again and again and again, and I'll say it again. We need to work outside the two-party system. That's why we went out to stream the Worker Strike Back conference. We need to build labor power. We need to build union power. We need to build grassroots power. We know statistically, we don't have to speculate. Most people recognize that this two-party system is irrevocably broken. It's been like that for years that people have said they wanted a viable third party. Most
Right.
people, it's very easy because these cultish Democrats and these cultish Republicans, they invest the most time online defining the conversation, but they don't actually represent most people. We do. We do. People who recognize that it's an entire shit show and don't want to join either. That's not a fringe minority. That's most of the country. The
Right.
problem is it's much easier to build a movement around a cult of personality or a cult of ideology than it is to say, hey, man, we got to walk out into the wilderness and build something new. It's
Right.
vague, it's nebulous, it's not as clear what it is. It's much harder to build a counter movement with that kind of an appeal.
Please clap.